Look, I know the government have to make cuts. I wish they weren't quite so relentlessly targeted at the poorest and most vulnerable members of society, and it would be nice if, while enacting them, certain ministers could try to look a little less obviously like they're having the time of their life. But I get that they have to happen somewhere, and it's naive to object to them all. So, when you hear this week that the government are making cuts to legal aid without going through Parliament, and lawyers and judges are protesting them, there's a bit of a temptation to go, do you know, I might sit this one out. I mean, it sounds really complicated. And hey, at least they're sticking it to the lawyers, eh? You know, we all hate lawyers, don't we? For some reason. Lawyers with their wigs and their law. Ooh. And sure enough, these reforms certainly do hurt lawyers, albeit mainly high street solicitors and legal aid firms, which, even if you do go along with the all lawyers are blood-sucking vampires line, is a bit like Van Helsing starting off by going after Count Duckula. It turns out the other people that these reforms really hurt is, well, I never, the poorest and most vulnerable members of society. Wow, the government really have a bee in their bonnet about those guys, don't they? It's like they're their nemesis or something.
The poorest and most vulnerable members of society, we meet again. But this time, the advantage is mine. And indeed it was last time, and every time. Anyway, brace yourselves. Here comes a kicking!
And the nature of this particular kicking is this. First, legal aid will have a financial eligibility threshold. To be fair, this doesn't seem like the worst idea in the world. And I can be confident about that, because right there next to it, as if deliberately placed there for purposes of comparison, are two of the worst ideas in the world. One, defendants will no longer have the right to choose their own lawyer. Two, legal aid contracts will be awarded on the basis of price-competitive tender, i.e. who's cheapest, to private companies, like Tesco and Eddie Stobart. You know, the lorry guy. Although I'm sure he's also an excellent lawyer. You might almost wonder whether this might affect the quality of the representation in some way. But Chris Grayling, Minister of Justice and dispenser of none, assures us it will not. And, of course, he's right, because we all know, don't we, from our own lives, that the cheaper you go, the more the quality stays exactly the same. But hey, at least you won't have to choose your solicitor, or be able to. No, even though everywhere else the government is obsessed with getting us to choose our doctor, our school, choose our hospital, when it comes to poor people who've been arrested, suddenly Daddy knows best. Never mind if you don't trust the solicitor you've been given, or if you have a mental illness, or if you're an ex-serving soldier who needs specialist representation. No, you'll just be given some bloke from Eddie Stobart who the government thinks is best for you, and like it. And by best for you, I literally mean cheapest. When a former Court of Appeal judge put the ex-soldier example to Tory MP Bob Neal on the Today programme, Mr Neal responded,
"Well, that relates to a tiny minority of cases."
"Oh, no, Bob, no. That's not the argument I want to hear you make. I want to hear about how these plans won't result in people being denied a fair trial, not how there won't be all that many of them, so hey-ho." Anyway, he had more pressing concerns. He went on to say,
"I don't actually think the public reckons it should be paying for repeat offenders going back to their regular solicitors."
"Yes, he's right. I don't want to pay for that. I only want to pay for solicitors for the innocent ones. Is there a way I can do that? A box I can tick on my tax form?" Because this is what these changes absolutely reek of. The sense of, well, they've been arrested and they're too poor to pay a lawyer. Probably did it. Or if they didn't do it, they probably did something else. Wouldn't be in court otherwise, stands to reason. Particularly, of course, if you compound your mistake of being arrested by willfully being foreign. Another nasty little amendment is that legal aid will now only be available if you're not only legally resident in Britain, but have lived here for at least 12 months. And if you haven't, or if you have but you can't prove it because, for instance, you fled from your abusive husband's house, then no domestic abuse trial for you, my funny foreign friend. So far, so depressing. But here's the part that, for me, lifts it out from merely misguided and mean to absolutely ridiculous and a bit evil. The bargain basement Eddie Stobart legal aid lawyers will be paid a flat fee, regardless of results, and best of all, regardless of whether the client pleads guilty, which is quick and cheap, or not guilty, which is not. Yes, Chris Grayling has actually created a system where privately run legal aid firms have a direct financial incentive to persuade their clients to plead guilty, while simultaneously being under enormous pressure to slash costs to the bone in order to put in a tender low enough to keep the contract. Meanwhile, the career crims who annoy Mr. Neal so much tend to trust their regular solicitor and take their advice if they suggest they'd be better off pleading guilty. But they're certainly not going to take that advice from Eddie McTesco in his My First Lawyer costume. So they're going to start pleading not guilty to everything. Well done, Mr. Grayling, you've pulled off the double. Innocent people encouraged to plead guilty, guilty people to plead not guilty. What a merry madcap world of misrule you have created, Mr. Grayling, you absolute tit. This reform will surely lead to a certain number of innocent people going to jail because they're scared and vulnerable, and their solicitor, with one eye on the meter, has advised them they'll get a shorter sentence that way. How large does that number have to be before it's not worth the savings? Does it have to be, for instance, that much above 1? Thank you.